Well, lucky me, I've got 3 revisions of the Juno behind me. I've got the Juno 106, the 6 and the 60, and above those, just out of shot, I've got the System 8, and that's got the Juno 60 and the Juno 106 ACB models in it. And while they're all here, I thought it might be quite interesting to take a look at the differences. It's a super simple synth with a massive sweet spot that's remarkably flexible. You can make complete tracks using just this as your only synth. And I've no idea if that track was written using only a Juno 60. It could have, it sounds like it, but it was definitely done with a better singer. Anyway, let's take a look at what we've got here. And we've got a single oscillator with a choice of a sawtooth or a pulse. Here's the sawtooth, pulse, and we can adjust the pulse manually. It goes from 50 to 95%. Or should do when it's calibrated, and we can modulate that with the envelope. We've got a single envelope, and that can control the amplifier or the VCF. We've got envelope control there, and it can be positive or negative, but we can also use the gate on the amplifier as well. We can also control the pulse switch or the tuning with this LFO, and that's got a delay. We've also got a sub, that's a 1 octave below and it's a square, and we've got noise. These have got control of the volume, whereas these are either on or off. And when you add them together, you do get a volume increase. Then got high pass, a resonant low pass, 24 dB, with key tracking. We've also got the magical Juno chorus. We've got the same controls on all of them, and really simple. Off. 1. Wonderful, that, isn't it? Or 2. Both buttons in together. As I say, a simple synth engine, which means it's a really popular synth to gain your first sound design stripes. And just to demo that point, let's use the Juno 6, and we've got no patch memories, and just start off with a simple pulse. Sounds like a nice bass already. Let's turn it into a bit more of a modern sounding bass. We'll drop the frequency, add some resonance, add a bit of envelope, drop the sustain, add a bit of decay. So now the filter's going to drop with a bit of resonance. Add some chorus. Bit like a Mr. Fingers bass there. And let's turn that into an acidy bass, or more acidy. Let's put it into a sawtooth. turn that into some brass. We'll take the resonance off. We'll add a little bit of attack to the filter. We'll put the amplitude onto a gate like a brass instrument. It's either on or it's off. Bring the sustain up. Send to a brass section. Let's turn that into some strings. So let's put the envelope back on the VCA. A lot of release. Turn that into PWM strings. So for PWM, we go to the pulse, we put it onto the LFO, bring up the pulse width modulation amount. Beautiful. Let's turn that into a piano, or as close as you're going to get to a piano with one of these. And put a bit of decay on it, sustains down to 0, and a bit of release. I'm going to put this onto manual. Some good old early 90s, late 80s bangers coming out here. Let's turn that into an electric piano, bring the frequency down, make it more of a square. Add a bit of LFO. Not bad, we can put some chorus on that. This is the quality of the presets you get on the Junos. Let's make that into like an electric bass sound. Make the pulse a bit thinner. Take the LFO off. Get in there, we can put some sub on there. It's better without the sub, isn't it? Sounds like a bass guitar-ish. And turn that into an organ, perhaps. We've not used the filter yet, the filter tracking. So take the sub off for now. Turn the filter onto full, put keyboard tracking on. Put this onto 0, or follow the gate even. Take the envelope off. Could add some LFO if you like. Not that much. But now we've got a bass, we've got an organ, we've got electric piano. I feel another tune coming on.
And kicks from the 808 when Roland was king and the songs were great. Jupiter, JX and Junos were ace, and we still love them now for the sounds they make. Got all the sixes here in one place.
The range was kicked off in May 1982 by this little beauty here. It's the Juno 6. It's a pretty simple affair. It's got no MIDI or CV connectivity and no patch memories. It's got a basic arpeggiator that can be clocked with an external source. And if we take a look at the modulation section down here, we've got a pitch bend wheel, plus we've got an LFO trigger switch. It's just on or off, with a couple of controls for the amount of modulation of the oscillator, pitch, or the VCF. And we've got this trigger mode here, which if you've only ever used a 106, you might not be familiar with. And this sets the LFO to auto or manual. In other words, will it do it automatically? So remember all that as we move over to the Juno 60. This was released as a replacement to the 6 in the September of 1982. That's just 5 months after the 6 was released. It's got the same voice boards as the 6, but the circuitry isn't exactly the same. So theoretically, there could be differences in the tone, but in essence, it's the same as the 60, but with the addition of these patch memories over here. We've got 5 banks, each with 8 patches. We've got tape functions for saving and loading patches. We can go into a manual mode. Plus on the back, we've got an additional patch shift input for changing patches with a pedal and a memory protect switch. And the big one here is the addition of this DCB output. And this was Roland's pre-MIDI connectivity platform, but it does mean that you can use this JSQ60, the Juno Sequencer 60. It's a polyphonic sequencer and it's a nightmare to use, but it means that, you know, you could hook this up to stuff. But I've been using this little thing. It's a DCB to USB MIDI by Valpower. It was about £70. But everything else on this is essentially the same as the 6, except for the high-pass filter on this. Although it looks like a slider, it's actually a switch. There are 4 distinct positions. I can feel them as I go up. And we also have a level for the VCA. And then we move over to the 106, which was produced between 1984 and 1988. And as we can see, this really does bring the whole concept into the future. It looks like a much more modern synth. The 6 and the 60 look like throwbacks from the 70s, which is maybe why we like them so much now. But in 1984, this was the future. And here we are 40 years later, and it integrates perfectly with my studio. Here's the editor and librarian I've been using. It's by Nightbirds Evolve. Works on the Mac, and it works seamlessly. There was a major redesign of the circuitry. Here's the inside of my 106. That's got the integrated voice and filter chips. And you can see I've taken the coating off these, but one of them has recently started to misbehave again. And just for reference, here's the inside of the Juno 60, and you can see it's completely different. And this and the 6 don't suffer from the same problems with the voice chips. But you can buy new voice chips for the 106. Here's the analog Renaissance ones, and there's double heart as well. Okay, then looking at the panel, we've got pretty much everything we've got on the 60 squeezed into a much smaller space. We've lost the arpeggiator, but we've gained a portamento. And this introduced the now familiar Roland integrated pitch bender and mod wheel. So we don't have the switch, and we also on the LFO here, we don't have the manual or the auto mode, but we do have the addition of the LFO amount on the LFO trigger. 2 8x8 matrices, they're 64 each, and we've got Group A and Group B. We can change the MIDI channel. We've lost the hold that was next to the key transpose, but we've got different poly modes. We're in poly mode 1. We always play the same voice over and over. Go to poly mode 2. You can hear we're playing different voices. You don't get that on the 6 or the 60, and you don't get a unison mode. Play them both together. There's no voice detune, so it creates a bit of a weird phasey effect. Anyway, let's now move over to some sound comparisons. So there are differences in tone. These things are subtle. They do sound like Junos, but they do sound like different synths. They're not identical. There is a distinct difference between the 106 and the 6 and the 60, which are much brighter. Here's the frequency analysis of all three on a sawtooth, just so you can see the Juno does drop off earlier. And here's another little geeky detail that I thought was interesting. This is the frequency analysis of each of the voices on the 60, and it shows the duty cycle of the square is different. You can see those intermediate even harmonics are different sizes. So any sound using a pulse is going to sound different. Her voice, never mind her synth. But if you're wondering which is best, there's no real best. They're all just different. It depends what's best for you or which you prefer. The 106, for example, it integrates perfectly with the studio. It is like a modern synth. You can use apps, you can use your DAW to control all the CCs on it, and it does have that absolute classic 80s and 90s tone. Especially in the 90s, people were using the 106 because it's got MIDI and you can integrate it with your studio. The 6 and the 60 were old school, annoying things that didn't interact with anything else. And price-wise, the 106 is the lowest of the three at around £1,500, although I'm not going to call it the cheapest, as at these prices, nothing is cheap. The 60 does have the benefit of having both the ARP and the patch memories. Patch memories aren't a big thing for me. I can dial up any sound I want in seconds, and the 60 is really expensive. At the moment, I think the 6 is my favourite. It's a little bit of an underdog, although I do wish it had a cheaper way of adding MIDI connectivity to it. The Kenton retrofit's about between £350 and £550, something like that. The 60's got the benefit of having the ARP and patch memory. No, actually, I think the 60 is my favourite. It's very similar to the 6, but I can't use that Valpower DCB MIDI connection. No, or the 106 perhaps, but then again, I do like the in-your-face tone of the older units. Having said that, the older units really don't have that classic tone. If indeed there's anything substantial to actually care about. Well, I hope you enjoyed that, and if you did, please think about subscribing, ring the bell, join me over on Patreon, take a look at starskycar.com, download some free patches and samples, pay for some if you want, but most of all, thanks for staying to the very end. You are my favourite, and I'll see you next time.